Frontier Radio Reading Service now presents a serialized reading of the book, The Guinness Book of Christmas. It's edited by Tom Hartman. The book was published in 1984 by Guinness Superlatives and is 144 pages long. Today's reading episode, number 4, begins on page 101. Your reader is Martha. Over the past decade alone, the trend has been to escape from the well-tried themes of old master paintings. Other forms of religious art, from stained glass and embroidery to carved pews and roof bosses, have also been explored, while both Greece and Cyprus have drawn on a seemingly endless supply of icons and frescoes for inspiration. In more recent years, individual Christmas carols have become a popular subject, enabling the artist's considerable scope. Christmas Island has understandably been one of the leading exponents of Christmas stamps, and in 1977 to the 8-issue set of stamps in the form of miniature sheets illustrating the words and the music of the 12 Days of Christmas and the Song of Christmas, respectively. Inevitably, as postal administrations look further afield for suitable subjects, considerable ingenuity is being shown, while some motifs have stretched the bounds of relevance to the limit. Among the odd subjects chosen for Christmas stamps may be mentioned Millie, the talking and swearing parrot, who was such a hit at the Montreal Expo of '67 and who graced the Christmas stamp of Guana in 1967 and '68. The stamps from the Crown dependencies of the British Isles have proven a high proportion of the quaint and the unusual, from the Mannix 5P of 1978, showing the traditional custom called Hunt the Wren, to Jersey 18P of 1981, featuring the Boxing Day meeting of the Jersey Drag Hunt. Occasionally, Christmas is linked to other events, hence the large number of stamps depicting the work of Michelangelo, Dürer, Rubens, and other artists on the occasion of their centenaries. In 1982, however, the BBC celebrated the 50th anniversary of the first Christmas broadcast by King George V, an event that provided Ascension and Jersey with the themes for their Christmas issues that year. Mention has been made of the special pictorial air letter sheets issued by Britain since 1965. Similar aerograms have been issued by Australia since 1961, while the New Zealand Post Office sells unstamped greetings and aerograms of a pictorial character. Special Christmas greeting telegrams have been produced by several countries, while during the Second World War, microfilm greetings, known in Britain as airgraphs and in America as V-mail, were sent to servicemen all over the world between 1941 and 1944. In 1978, the British Post Office launched its first Christmas booklet of stamps. Each booklet contained strips of the prevailing first and second class postage stamps side by side, while the cover had an attractive Christmas motif. It was intended that these booklets would make an ideal and inexpensive gift from children to their old-age pensioners' grandparents. This idea was repeated in subsequent years, but was taken a step farther in 1982 when booklets containing stamps worth £2.8 were sold at a discount of £30. To prevent the discount stamps from being detached and sold at the full price, each stamp was issued with a blue star of Bethlehem printed on the reverse beneath the gum. As before, the booklet cover had an appropriate Christmas motif, but the stamps themselves, 12.5 and 15.5 definitives, thus became distinctive and merit inclusion in any collection of Christmas stamps. Chapter 6, Abroad. Welcome to Christmas Island. Places with a Christmas flavor. A number of places which were either discovered or founded on Christmas Day are named appropriately. The South African province of Natal was discovered by Vasco da Gama on Christmas Day 1497 and takes its name from the Portuguese word for Christmas. From 1857 until 1910, Natal had its own stamps, but no longer features in the list stamp issuing countries. Its place has been taken by Christmas Island. Actually, there are 3 places of that name, 1 in Canada and 2 in the southern hemisphere. Both of the latter have or had their own stamps. Christmas Island in the Central Pacific had its own distinctive stamp from 1915 till 1936, issued by the Central Pacific Coconut Plantations, which leased the island. From 1942 until 48, the island was an American Army base, and in the 1950s it was used by Britain for nuclear tests, and British stamps on mail from military and scientific personnel bore a distinctive Christmas Island postmark. It now forms part of the nations of Kiribati, pronounced Kiribati, which comprises 33 ocean specks straddling the international date line. 264 square miles of land scattered over 2 million square miles of the Pacific. It has 4 settlements, quaintly named London, Paris, Poland, and Banana. Christmas Island in the eastern Indian Ocean, south of Java, was once administered by Singapore, but was transferred to Australia in 1958 and has since had its own stamp. It was discovered by William Dampier on Christmas Day, 1688, but not colonized till 1889. It was occupied by the Japanese in the Second World War, but liberated by the Australian forces in 1945. Although it has a conservative stamp issuing policy, Christmas Island has produced some of the most colorful and interesting Christmas stamps of recent years. Fort Christmas in Florida was founded in 1835, and a post office named simply Christmas was opened in 1892. In recent years, it has handled upwards of 300,000 items each December, both hand-struck and machine cancellations being accompanied by a cachet depicting a Christmas tree and the slogan, "Glory to God in the highest." Special Christmas postmarks are also provided at Christmas, Missouri, while among the other American postmarks sought at the season of the year are those used at Christmas Cove, Maine, and Christmas Valley, Oregon. The hamlet of Christmas Hills in Tasmania does not normally boast a postal facility, but as a special dispensation at Christmas, the Australian Post Office provided a pictorial chancellor in 1982 inscribed, "Christmas greetings from Santa Claus." Santa Claus himself has given his name to villages in California and Indiana, and both these have had special postmarks applied to greeting correspondence. The town of Santa Claus, Indiana, celebrated its centennial in 1952 with a slogan postmark showing the Rubicon gentleman himself. The city of Natal in Brazil, founded on Christmas Day 1597, as a fortress to stamp out mahogany smuggling, is now the capital of the state of Rio Grande do Norte, but it still remembers its origin each Christmas with a special postmark showing infant Jesus. The village of Christkindl in Austria literally means little Christ child. It was not important enough to have a permanent post office, but in 1950 a temporary facility was opened at the village inn, and a pictorial postmark showing the Christ child was applied on mail sent all over the world. Since 1954, however, a different motif has been used each year, and Christkindl has grown in importance. A stamp showing the village church was added to the Austrian Definitive Series in 1958, the year that the Christkindl postmark showed the opening bars of Silent Night to celebrate the 140th anniversary of the famous Christmas Carol. A special Christmas postmark is provided each year for use on mail posted in the hamlet of Bethlehem near Llanelidilo in Wales. Similar Christmas mailings occur from the places called Bethlehem in New Zealand and South Africa, as well as the Bethlehems in Georgia, Indiana, Kentucky, and Maryland. As if this were not enough, the postmarks from Holly, Michigan, Mistletoe, Kentucky, and Snowflake, Arizona, are also much prized on seasonal greeting cards. Christmas at sea. The sheets were frozen hard, and they cut the naked hand. The decks were like a slide where a seaman scarce could land. The wind was a nor'western, blowing equally off the sea, and cliffs and spouting breakers were the only thing alee. They heard the surf a-roaring before the break of day, but 'twas only with a peep of light we saw how ill we lay. We tumbled every hand on deck, instanter with a shout, and we gave her the main tops and stood by to go about. All day we tacked and tackled between the south head and the north. All day we hauled the frozen sheets and got no further north. All day as cold as charity and bitter pain and dread, for very life and nature we tacked from head to head. We gave the south a wider berth, for there the tide race roared, but every tack we made we brought the north head close aboard. So we saw the cliffs and houses and the breakers running high, and the Coast Guard in his garden with his glass against the eye. The frost was on the village roofs as white as ocean foam. The good red fires were burning bright in every longshore home. The windows sparkled clear and the chimneys volleyed out, and I vow we sniffed the victuals as the vessel went about. The bell upon the church was rung with a mighty jovial chirr, for it just that I should tell you how of all the days of year. This day of our adversity was blessed Christmas morn, and the house above the Coast Guard was the house where I was born. Oh well, I saw the pleasant room, the pleasant faces there, my mother's silver spectacles, my father's silver hair, and well I saw the firelight, like a flight of homely elves, go dancing round the china plates that stand upon the shelves. And well I knew the talk they had, the talk that was of me, of the shadow on the household and the son that went to sea. And oh, the wicked fool I seemed in every kind of way, to be here hauling frozen ropes on blessed Christmas Day. They lit the high seas light, and the dark began to fall. All hands to loose, top-gallant sails, I heard the captain call. By the Lord, she'll never stand it, our first mate, Jackson cried. It's the one way or the other, Mr. Jackson, he replied. She staggered to her bearings, but the sails were new and good, and the ship smelt up to windward just as though she understood. As the winter's day was ending in the entry of the night, we cleared the weary headlands and passed below the light. And they heaved a mighty breath, every soul on board but me, as they saw her nose again pointing handsome out to sea. But all that I could think of in the darkness and the cold was just that I was leaving home and my folks were growing old. The poem was written by Robert Louis Stevenson. This one is Christmas at Sea 2, from the diary of the Reverend Henry Tong, naval chaplain. Henry Tong, 1621-1690, went to sea as chaplain on board the Assistance in 1675, and later served aboard the Bristol and the Royal Oak. His diary, which shows him to have been a pleasant, easygoing man, gives an amusing picture of life in the Navy at that time. 1675, Christmas Day, we keep thus. At 4 in the morning our trumpeters all do flap their trumpets and begin at our captain's cabin, and thence to all the officers' and gentlemen cabins, playing a Levite at each cabin door, and bidding good morrow, wishing a Merry Christmas. The Levite is a trumpet call or musical trained to rouse soldiers or others in the morning. After they go to their station, viz. On the poop, and sound 3 Levites in honor of the morning, At 10 we go to prayers and sermon, text Zechariah 9. Our captain has all his officers and gentlemen to dinner with him, where we had excellent good fare, a rib of beef, plum pudding, mince pies, and so forth, and plenty of good wines of several sorts. Drank healths to the king, to our wives and friends, and ended the day with much civil mirth. 1678, Good Christmas Day. We go to prayers at 10, and the wind rose of such a sudden that I was forced, by the captain's command, to conclude abruptly at the end of the litany, and we had no sermon. We had not so great a dinner as was intended, for the whole fleet being in this harbor, beef could not be got. Yet we had a dinner of an excellent rice pudding in a great charger, a special piece of Merriman's English beef, and a neat's tongue and a good cabbage, a charger full of excellent fresh fish fried, a dozen of woodcocks in a pie, which cost 15d, a couple of good hens roasted, 3 sorts of cheese, and last of all a great charger full of blue figs, almonds, and raisins, wine and punch galore, and a dozen of English pipins. Christmas Day in the Army. The following account of Christmas Day in a cavalry regiment was written in 1875 by Archibald Forbes, then a well-known journalist, who had served in the Royal Dragoons between 1859 and 1864. Christmas Day is the great regimental merrymaking. About a month before, self-denial fellows busy themselves in constructing dim mocking bags for the occasion, such being the barrack room term for receptacles for money-hoarding purposes. The weak vessels managed to cheat the fragility of saving grace by requesting their sergeant major to put them on the peg, that is to say, place them under stoppages. Everybody becomes a sudden, astonishingly sober and steady. The guardroom is unwontedly empty. Nobody except the utterly reckless will get into trouble just now. The clever hands of the troop are deep in devising a series of ornamentations for the wall and roof of the common habitation. One fellow spends all his spare time embellishing the wall above the fireplace with a floral design in a variety of colors, meant to be an exact copy of the device on the regiment's kettle drums, with the addition of the legend, "A Merry Christmas to the Old Straw Boots," inscribed on a waving scroll below. The skill of another decorator is directed to the clipping of sundry squares of colored paper into a wondrous form, Prince of Wales feathers, gorgeous festoons, and the like, with which the gas pendants and the edges of the window frames are disguised. A couple of days before the day, the sergeant major enters the barrack room. He cannot refrain from the customary short, patronizing harangue. "Or our worthy captain, liberal gent, you know, deputed me. What you like for dinner? Plum pudding, of course. A quart of beer, man. Make up your mind what you'll have, anything but game and venison," and so he vanishes grinning, a saturnine grin. The alternative lies between pork and goose. Goose versus pork is eagerly debated. As regards quantity, the question is a level one, since the allowance from time immemorial has been a goose or a leg of pork among 3 men. The sergeant major is informed of the conclusion arrived at after the evening stables, and the corporal of each room accompanies him on a marketing expedition into town, taking with him the contents of the democking bags and the stoppages in the sergeant major's hands. He goes direct to the fountainhead. If there is a brewery in the place, he finds it out and bestows his order upon it, thus triumphantly securing the pure article at the wholesale price. His purchasing calculations is upon the basis of 2 gallons per man. For 12 men, he ordered 24-gallon barrel of porter, always porter, a dark brown bitter beer, brewed from partly charred malt. It is Christmas Eve. The evening stable hour is over, and all hands are merrily engaged in the composition of the puddings, some stoning fruit, others chopping suet, beating eggs, and so forth. Usually one man is the acknowledged pudding maker expert. His comrades pull out their clean towels for pudding cloths. They run to the canteen enthusiastic for a further supply on a hint from him that there is a deficiency in the ingredient of allspice. And then he artistically gathers together the corners of the cloths and ties up the pudding tightly and securely, whereupon a procession is formed to escort them to the cookhouse. And there, having consigned them into the depths of the mighty copper, the man of the time remains watching the cauldron bubble until morning, a great jurum of beer at his elbow, the ready contribution of his appreciative comrades. Christmas Day. On an ordinary morning, the reveille is practically negated, and nobody thinks of stirring from between the blankets till the warning sounds a quarter of an hour before the morning stable time. But on this morning there is no slothful skulking. The soldier's wife, who has the cleaning of the room and who does the washing for the inmates, for which service each man pays her a penny a day, has from time immemorial taken upon himself the duty of bestowing a morning on the Christmas anniversary upon the men she does for. Accordingly, about 5:45 she enters the room. She carries a bottle of whiskey. It is always whiskey somehow, in one hand and a glass in the other, and beginning with the oldest soldier administers a cockler, a dram, to every one in the room till she comes to the Crooty, upon whom, if he is pullet-faced homesick bit of a lad, she may bestow a maternal salute in addition, with the advice to consider the regiment as his mother now. Church parade follows morning stables, but there are 2 of the inmates of each room who do not go to church. The clever pudding maker and a sub of his selection are left to cook the Christmas dinner. This, as regards the exceptional dainties, is done at the barrack room fire, the cookhouse being in use only for the now despised ration meat and for the still simmering puddings. The handyman cunningly improvises a roasting jack and erects a screen consisting of bedquilts spread on a frame of upright forms for the purpose of retaining and throwing back the heat. There is a large expanse of table in every barrack room. Bare boards at a Christmas feast are horribly offensive to the eye of taste. Something must be done. Something has already been done. Ever since the last issue of Clean Sheets, which took place once a month, 1 or 2 whole-souled fellows have magnanimously abjured these luxuries pro bono publico. Spartan-like, they have lain in blankets and saved their sheets in their pristine cleanliness, wherewithal to cover the Christmas table. After church parade and watering and feeding the horses, the men assemble fully dressed in the barrack room, hungrily silent. The captain enters the room and pro forma asks whether there are any complaints. A chorus of "No, sir," is his reply, and then the oldest soldier in the room, with profuse blushing and stammering, takes up the running, thanks the offers kindly in the name of his comrades for generosity, and wishes him a happy Christmas, and many of them in return. Under cover of the responsive cheer, the captain makes his escape, and a deputation visits the sergeant major's quarters to fetch the allowance of beer, which forms part of the treat. Then they fall to eat. Ye gods, how they eat! In 20 minutes of silent eating, be the fair goose or pork, it is bearing the bones, only a memory of the past. The puddings turn out of the towels in which they have been boiled, then undergo the brunt of a fierce assault. But the edge of appetite has been blunted by the first course, and with most of the men a modicum of pudding goes on the shelf for supper. At length dinner is over. Beds are drawn up from the sides of the room so as to form a wide circle of divans around the fire. In the big barrel's time has come at last. A clever hand whips out the bung, draws a pailful, and reinserts the bung till another pailful is wanted, which will be very soon. The pail is placed upon the hearthstone, and its contents are decanted into pint basins, which do duty in the barracks room for all purposes, from containing coffee and soup to mixing chrome yellow and piped clay water. The married soldiers come dropping in with their wives, for whom the corporal has a special drop of something short stowed away in reserve on the shelf behind his kit. A song is called for. The songs of soldiers are never of the modern music hall type. You never hear such a ditty as Champagne Charlie or Not for Joseph. The soldier takes especially delight in songs of the sentimental pattern, and even when he forsakes the region of sediment, it is to give vent to such sturdy Bacchanalian outpourings as the Good Rhine Wine, Old John Barleycorn, and Simon the Cellier. But these are only interludes. The soldier's tear, the white squall. There came a tale of England, Ben Bolt, shells of the ocean, and other melodies of lugubrious type are the special favorites of the barrack room. Song and beer form the staple of the afternoon enjoyment. There is no speechifying. It is a lucky thing for a good many that there is no roll call on Christmas morning stable hour. The non-commissioned officers mercifully limit their requirements to seeing the horses watered and bedded down by the most presentable of the roysters. This interruption over the circle reforms around the fire, and the casts finally become a dead marine. A gift from Legion. When I was a boy, which was a good many years ago, there was a very queer celebration on New Year's Day in the little Monmouthshire town where I was born. Cerlin on Usk, the town children, village children, would be nearer the mark since the population of the place amounted to 1,000 souls or thereabout. Got the biggest and bravest and gayest apple they could find in the loft, deep in the dry bracken. They put bits of gold leaf upon it. They stuck raisins into it. They inserted into the apple little springs of box, and then they delicately slit the ends of the hazelnuts and so worked that the nuts appeared to grow from the ends of the box leaves. To be disproportionate fruit of these small trees. At last 3 bits of stick were fixed onto the base of the apple, tripod-wise, and so it was borne round from house to house, and the children got cakes and sweets, and those were the wild days, remember? Small cups of ale, and nobody knew what it was all about. And here is the strangest. Karelen means the fort of the legions, and for about 300 years the Second Austrian Legion was quartered there and made a tiny Rome of the place, with amphitheaters, baths, temples, and everything necessary for the comfort of the Roman Britain. And the Legion brought over the custom of the Strenna, the New Year's gift of good omen. The apple with the gold leaf, raisins, and nuts meant good crops and wealth in the new year. It is the poet Martial, I think, who alludes to the custom. He was an ungrateful fellow, since somebody sent him a gold cup as a New Year's gift, and he said the gold of the cup was so thin that it would have done very well to put on the festive apple of the day. Well, I suppose the Second Austrian was recalled somewhere about A.D. 400. The Saxon came to Cuckolden and asked him the Dane, and then the Norman, and then the modern spirit, the worst enemy of all, and still up to the 50 years ago. The Karelen children kept New Year's Day as if the legionaries were yet in the garrison. Christmas in Spain, 1824. The Christmas festival is still observed in Madrid in the same manner that was practiced a century ago. The evening of the vigil is scarcely dark, with numbers of men, women, boys are seen traversing the streets with torches, and many of them supplied with tambourines, which they strike loudly as they move along in the kind of bacchanal procession. There was a tradition here that the shepherds who visited Bethlehem on the day of the Nativity had instruments of this sort upon which they expressed the sentiment of joy that animated them when they received the intelligence that a Savior was born. Hence, for weeks before Christmas, there is a fair in Madrid where scarcely anything but tambourines are sold, and every family, of the lower order at least, thinks it necessary to have one. If the younger branches do not issue into the streets with them, they use them in their houses. In some instances, aided by the guitar, they spend the whole night dancing to these tambourines, or to another instrument which they call the zambo. At 12 o'clock, the midnight mass is celebrated in all churches. As soon as the clock strikes, the priests come forth vested from the sacristy and repair to the altar, which is already lighted and prepared for the occasion. The organ peals forth a hymn of joy, and the mass is commenced. During the service, several pieces of national music are performed, particularly that which is called the Munira, which is the fine old composition. But what is most remarkable in this ceremony is that the crowds of people who perhaps have been traversing the streets the whole night come into the church with their tambourines and guitars and accompany the organ. I do not say that this is a custom deserving of appropriation to a foreigner. However, it appears a striking peculiarity, and when he considers it as a relic of old custom, he finds it's the source of many strange and interesting reflections. When the Mass is over, the musical group begins to dance in the very body of the church, and there is really so much of the spirit of joy in their motions that though they are undoubtedly indecorous in this place, they are almost contagious. The fact is that there is a little of the spirit of the grape, too, in these scenes. The eve of Christmas Day is a strict fast, but the Spaniards, who very rarely drink much, indulge liberally on this occasion in wine, and though there are few of them actually intoxicated, they are generally a little elevated. The best consequence of the whole is that everybody without exception is in a humor to please and to be pleased, an honorable trait in the national character, since it is well understood that the true disposition of the man appears unequivocally in his cups. You may say what you like to a Spaniard on this night, and he will not take offense. Everybody wears a smile on his countenance. Chapter 7. Sports. Soccer at Christmas. Oldham Athletic were involved in 2 Boxing Day matches, which produced different individual scoring records in 2 divisions. On 26 December 1935, Bunny Bell scored 9 goals for Tranmere Rovers against Oldham in a Division III Northern game, but missed a second-half penalty kicked in Rovers' 13-4 win. Then 27 years later, Oldham center forward Bert Lister scored 6 times for them when they beat Southport 11-0 in Division IV, which was also Oldham's record win. The last occasion that a Division I match produced a double figures for one side was on Boxing Day 1963 at Craven Cottage when Fulham beat Ishbit Town 10-1. It was Fulham's record win and Ishbit's heaviest defeat. Graham Leggett scored 3 goals in 3 minutes, the fastest hat trick in Division I history. On the same day, in another Division I game, Blackburn Rovers won 8-2 at Upton Park against West Ham United. It was United's heaviest defeat on the day, when 157 goals were scored in 39 league games, 66 of them coming from 10 Division I matches. 2 days later, Ipswich beat Fulham 4-2, and West Ham won 3-1 at Blackburn. Coventry City Christmas present to their supporters on 25th December 1919 was to win 3-2 at Stoke City in a Division II match during their first season in the Football League. It came after a run of 11 matches without goal. 3 Sheffield Wednesday players, Norman Curtis, Eddie Gannon, and Vince Kennedy, each put through their own goal against West Bromwich Albion in a Division I match on Boxing Day 1952 Wednesday, lost 5-4. But on Christmas Day 1954, there was a heavier reverse for Rockdale against Carlisle United when Henry Boyle, Danny Murphy, and George Underwood emulated the usual hat trick by putting through their own goal in Rochdale's 7-2 defeat. The fastest dismissal in Football League history occurred on Christmas Day 1936 at Hull when Wexham Scottish-born inside right Ambrose Brown was sent off after 20 seconds of the start of a Division III Northern match. Hull won 1-0. Kevin Tully was sent off the field after making his debut for Blackpool at Burnley on 27 December 1971 in a Division II game. Burnley won 2-1. Frank Swift made his debut in goal for Manchester City on Christmas Day 1933, the day after his 19th birthday. He then played in 234 out-of-city, next 235 league games up to the outbreak of the Second World War in 1939. The run included 192 consecutive appearances. The first Football League game played on Christmas Day was on the 25th December 1889, when Preston North End, the reigning champions, beat Ashton Village 3-2. The last two Football League games scheduled for the Christmas Day were in 1959. Although several Football League clubs played two games on Christmas 1940 in North and South Regional League matches, Tommy Lawton and Linz Shackleton each played for two different sides. In the morning, Lawton led the Everton attack at Liverpool when they were beaten 3-1, and in the afternoon, guest for Tranmere at home and Crewe Alexandra, scoring both Rovers' goal in a 2-2 draw. Shackleton played for the Bradford Park Avenue team, beaten 2-1 at Leeds United in the morning, and then guested for Bradford City in the afternoon, headed a goal from 15 yards in the city, 4-3 at Hudderston Town. On the morning of 27 December 1948, Billy Gray played for Leyton Oriental Reserves at Chelsea in the football combination and for the first team in Division III Southern at home in Port Vale in the afternoon when Orient won 2-0. Henry Lovett played for Leicester City Reserves against Coventry City in the London combination on Christmas Day 1930 and was then transferred to Notts County, playing for them against Coventry on 27 December in the Division III Southern game. They won 4-1. On Christmas Eve 1947, Harry Jackson, the Manchester City center forward, was transferred to Preston North End. On Christmas Eve 1948, he was transferred from Preston to Blackburn Rovers. On 27 December 1930, Aston Villa defeated Manchester United 7-0 at Villa Park in the Division I match. United was relegated at the end of the season. On 26 December the following year, United lost 7-0 away to the Wolverhampton Wanderers in a Division II game. On Christmas Day 1952, Carlisle United beat Scunthorpe United 8-0 in a Division III Northern match. It was Carlisle's record win and Scunthorpe's heaviest defeat. On Christmas Day 1940, Brighton and Howe Albion traveled to Norwich City for a Regional League South match. They were only able to muster 5 players, and their side was completed with city reserves and servicemen from the crowd. Norwich won 18-0, scoring in 3-5, 15, 19, 23, 24, 29, 35, 40, 41, 52, 54, 69, 73, 75, 78, 80, and 83 minutes. Their halftime score of 10 goals was the highest for one half in a wartime game. On Christmas Day 1941, Bristol City set off for a match in Southampton in 3 cars. The last to leave contained center forward Clary Burton and fullback Jack Priest, together with the team's kit. The car arrived first, but although the kickoff was delayed for an hour, the other 2 cars did not appear. Southampton manager Tom Parker offered to loan Bristol City 5 players plus their trainer Gallagher, who had not played for several years. They completed the team with 3 spectators, including a soldier and a schoolmaster. 20 minutes after the match started, the missing 9 players arrived. 1 car had broken down and the other had stayed to assist, but it was too late to reorganize the city team, so the substitutes played on, while the 9 sat in the stands and watched. Trainer Gallagher scored a goal against his old side, but Southampton won 5-2. Everton fullback Billy Cook scored penalties in 3 consecutive Division I matches within 4 days over Christmas 1938. On Saturday, 24 December, against Blackpool on Goodison Park, Everton won 4-0. 2 days later, at home to Derby County, the match ended in a 2-2 draw, while on the 27th December, Everton lost 2-1 at Derby. But Everton won the league championship that season. On Boxing Day 1924, Nottingham Forest were awarded a penalty against Bolton Wanderers in a Division I match. At the time, the regular penalty taker outside left Harry Martin was in the dressing room receiving attention from the trainer. Forrest refused to take the kick until Martin was summoned from the treatment room, and when he did appear on the field, he scored from the spot kick to enable Forrest to draw 1-1. Bolton protested after the match to no avail, but Forrest finished bottom of the league and were relegated at the end of the season. Walsall arrived at Barley Bank, Darwin, on Boxing Day 1896, with 7 players and a committee man whose registration was rushed through for the Division II match. The rest of the team had missed their connection. With the aid of a strong wind and winning the toss and the clever disposition of their men, they managed to work the offside trap, holding Darwin at bay for the first quarter of an hour. However, once they had broken through, the home side quickly scored 4 goals, and Walsall only crossed the halfway line 3 times in the first half. Despite heroic work by Walsall's goalkeeper at the interval, Darwin added a further 8 to win 12-0. Cricket at Christmas. Although Christmas marks the middle of cricket's hibernation period in Britain, interrupted by the occasional Boxing Day charity match on a matting pitch, sometimes laid on snow, it is very much a part of cricket overseas. Probably the most remarkable batting partnership of all began on Christmas morning in 1928 at the Melbourne Cricket Ground. Playing an Australian National Championship for the Sheffield Shield, visiting New South Wales had lost 9 wickets for 113 runs in reply to Victoria's first inning total of 376, when their captain Alan Kippack was joined by the last batsman Hal Hooker. Their stand continued well into Boxing Day. Nearly 25 hours had passed when John Edward Halford Hooker, an extremely accurate open bowler who was unlucky never to gain selection at test level, fell to a one-handed catch at mid-off. He had contributed 62 runs to a partnership of 307, which remains the world record for the 10th wicket in all first-class cricket. Kippax, Mr. Elegant, had taken his score from 22 to 260, not out as his team achieved a highly improbable lead of 44 runs. New South Wales went on to win the Sheffield Shield. 2 years earlier, this same fixture between the main protagonists of Australian cricket had produced the world record total for all first-class matches, when Victoria amassed 1,107 on 27 to 28 December. Bill Ponsford, 352, and Jack Ryder, 295, were the main contributors to an inning which lasted only 10.5 hours. Christmas week of 1981 saw 2 World Test cricket records eclipsed. At Delhi on 23 December, Geoffrey Boycott overtook the record aggregate of 8,032 runs by Sir Garfield Sobers. 4 days later in Melbourne, Dennis Lillee broke Lance Gibbard's bowling record of 309. The first women's test match was played between Australia and England at Brisbane on 28-31 December 1934, England winning by 9 wickets. South Africa and New Zealand have witnessed only one instance apiece of a bowler taking all 10 wickets in first-class innings, and both were completed on the 28th of December. In 1889, A. Mose of Canterbury took 10 for 28 against Wellington to become the only bowler to take all 10 wickets in his first-class match. 17 years later, A. E. Bert Vogler of Eastern Provence bowled unchanged throughout both innings to take 16 Gridland West tickets in the day, including 10 for 26 in the second innings. At Christ Church on 26-27 December 1952, Bert Sutcliffe scored 385 in 461 minutes to establish the current record score in New Zealand first-class cricket. Playing in a Plunket Shield match against Canterbury, he scored his runs out of an Otago total of 500, which proved sufficient for an innings victory. Glenn Turner, the last player to score 1,000 runs before June in a triple century on a single day, made his first-class debut for Otago on Christmas Day 1964, whilst he was still attending school in Dunedin, New Zealand. Tennis at Christmas. On the Northern Hemisphere, one does not normally think of tennis as a Christmas activity. The ambience of the sport is the summer, despite indoor courts. On the vicarage lawns of England, where the game began, and on the turf of the cricket and baseball clubs in New England and the U.S., where the game took root as well, it was a summer sport from the start. Yet it is clear that the man who invented lawn tennis, the immortal Major Walter Clopton Wingfield, visualized his game being played in the depths of winter. In his famous pamphlet, which he issued in February 1874 to publicize his Spears-like, and of which only a handful of copies are known to survive of the first edition, he specifically mentions only one surface on which he might be played, and that surface, incredibly, was ice, and with players wearing skates. How much more Christmassy can you get? The whole tone of the booklet is wintry. In the first place, WCW, as Wingfield identified himself, dedicates it on the title page to the party assembled at Knockclaw, December 1873. Knockclaw is in the depths of North Wales, no place for the sport in the sun at that time. It is clear that the worthy major, formerly of the King's Dragoon Guards, and then one of the officers of Her Majesty's bodyguard at Gentlemen-at-Arms, and whose efforts inspired the growth of the world's most widely played sport after soccer, had a Christmas activity in mind. His introduction reads, "The game of tennis may be traced back to the days of the ancient Greeks under the name of spiker-like. It was subsequently played by the Romans under the name of filii. It was the fashionable pastime of the nobles of France during the reign of Charles V, and it was in vogue in England as early as Henry III, and is described by Gregory as one of the most ancient games in Christendom. Henry V, Henry VII, and Henry VIII were all tennis players, and it has only now died out owing to the difficulties of the game and the expense of erecting courts. All these difficulties have now been surmounted by the inventor of lawn tennis, which has all the interest of tennis and has the advantage that it may be played in the open air in any weather by people of any age and of both sexes. It is a hard frost, the nets may be erected on the ice, and then the players, being equipped with skates, the game assumes a new feature and gives an opening for the exhibition of much grace and science. Thus Major Wingfield, whoever one may wonder, has seen the grace and science of tennis on ice." The toughest Christmas match. For 23 years after the Second World War, the challenge round in the Davis Cup, replaced by a final round in 1972, saw Australia as one of the participants. The USA were their opponents on the first 14 of these dramatic occasions. Australia staged the climax tie in 46, 51, 52, 53, 1954, 56, 57, 58, 60, 61, 62, 63, 65, 66, 67, 68, and 1977. On most occasions, it was essentially a Christmas affair. The ties each comprising two singles on the first day, a doubles on the second, with the reverse singles on the third, began on Boxing Day. At no time in Australian history was competitive tennis staged on Christmas Day itself. Nonetheless, the timing of the matches put an end to all hope of normal Christmas festivities by the teams. It was training hard and rigorous. The toughness of the tennis may usefully be measured by the total number of games played. The 1958 Challenge round tie in Brisbane, in which the U.S. beat Australia 3-2, was the longest tie ever staged in the Challenger final round. The total number of games for the 5 rubbers was 270. In the open singles, Alex Olmendio, Peruvian-born but playing for the U.S., beat Mel Anderson 8-6, 2-6, 9-7, 8-6. Then Ashley Cooper for Australia leveled the score by beating Barry McKay 4-6, 6-3, 6-2, 6-4. That was 89 games for Boxing Day. In the doubles, the Americans took the lead again. Olmedo and Ham Richardson, a rare figure in the game in being both Rhodes Scholar and a diabetic, beat Anderson and Neil Frazier 10-12, 3-6, 16-14, 6-3, 7-5. This mammoth contest added 82 more games, making 171 for 2 days. The third day of Christmas saw America make victory certain when Olmedo beat Cooper 6-3, 4-6, 6-4, 8-6. In the fifth rubber, Anderson beat McKay 7-5, 13-11, 11-9. That was 99 more games, making 270 in all. The toughest Boxing Day belonged to the year before, 1957. The U.S. were the opponents in the setting, the Kooyong Courts in Melbourne. The Australians took a lead of 2-0 and eventually 3-0 before a final 3-2 victory. Ashley Cooper beat Vic Sextus 3-6, 6-7, 5-6, 11-6, 6-3. That was 44 games. Mel Anderson then beat Barry McKay 6-3, 7-5, 3-6, 6-7, 9-6-3. That was 55 more in days total of 99 games, a Boxing Day record. Individually, the greatest Boxing Day hardship was experienced by Fred Stoley of Australia and Manuel Santana in the Challenge round of 1965. It was Spain's first appearance at that stage, and they were very much the underdogs. Even so, the Spanish Santana excelled himself in the opening signal. Stoley was thankful to climb back from the loss of the first 2 sets to win 10-12, 3-6, 6-1, 6-4, 7-5. 60 games for the one single. It was a memorable Christmas for both. Chapter 8, Anniversaries. Famous people born on Christmas Day. Sir Isaac Newton, English mathematician and physicist, famous for his discoveries in the field of gravitation, planetary motion, and optics. One of the developers of differential and integral calculus. Best known works: Philosophiae Naturae, Principal Mathematics, 1689, and Optics, 1704. He died in 1727. Johanna Jacob Reisky, born in Zorbic, Saxony, now GDR, expert on Arabic and Greek literature who laid foundation for future Arabic historical scholarship. Best known for his work, Ablethay Annals Mausoleh, died in 1774. 1721, William Collins, born in Chichester, Sussex. He was one of the finest English lyric poets, best known for his work, Persian Eclogues. He suffered from mental illness from 1751 to his death, 1759. 1759, Richard Porson, Norfolk-born classical Greek scholar, professor of Greek at Trinity College, Cambridge, edited plays. Often a bore and a drunker, he was nevertheless admired for his learning and wit, and he died in 1809. Dorothy Wordsworth, much-loved sister and housekeeper to the poet William, born in Cockermouth, Cumberland. 1821, Clara Barton founded the American Red Cross in 1881 and was its president for 23 years. She was originally a school teacher and then a government clerk. She organized relief for the wounded in the American Civil War. Afterwards, at President Lincoln's request, she set up a bureau to locate missing soldiers. She died in 1912. 1871, Alexander Nikolaus Scriabin, Russian composer and virtuoso pianist, dabbled in mysticism and used his own harmonic chord, mainly known for his piano compositions, especially 10 sonatas and a concerto, and he died in 1915. There's still a listing of others, and I'm just going to read their names. 1876, Muhammad al-Jinnah, who was an Indian Muslim politician who founded the state of Pakistan. 1883, Maurice Urtilio, French painter, particularly known for pictures of Montmartre street scenes. 1885, Paul Manship, American sculptor. 1887, Conrad Hilton, American hotel magnate. 1892, Dame Rebecca West, Irish-born journalist, novelist, and critic. 1892, Sir Noel Vanstart Bowater, businessman. 1899, Humphrey Bogart, American film actor. 1901, Princess Alice, Duchess of Gloucester, third daughter of the Duke. In 1905, Baron Westward, William Westward, succeeded his father in 1953. 1906, Baron Grade, Lou Grade, created Life Pier in 1976, having been knighted in 1969. 1905, Andrew Cruikshank, Scottish-born stage, screen, and radio actor. 1907, Cab Calloway, American black band leader and singer. 1911, Sir Charles Mott Radcliffe, member of the Parliament of Windsor. 1916, Baron Anna Noel Gilroy. Anna created Life Pier in 1965. 1918, Mohammed Anwar Sadat, Army officer, became Vice President of Egypt. 1936, Princess Alexandra. 1945, Alice Cooper, real name Vincent Furrier, outrageous pop singer. Famous people who died on Christmas Day. Perseus, wealthy Roman Stoic poet. 1676, Sir Matthew Hale, Chief Justice of the King's Bench. 1712, William King, English poet and wit. 1875, Thomas Morris. Young Tom was the youngest player ever to win the Open Golf Championship. 1935, Paul Bourget, French poet and novelist. 1938, Karel Capek, internationally famous novelist and playwright. 1946, W.C. Fields. 1961, Otto Lowick, German-born physician and pharmacologist. 1977 was Charles Spencer Chaplin, multi-talented film star, and born in London in 1889. We'll conclude our reading at this point. You've been listening to a serialized reading of the book Guinness Book of Christmas, edited by Tom Hartman. The Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service presents serialized book readings weekday afternoons at 2 and weeknights at 10. This is Martha, hoping you'll join us for another book reading. Thank you for listening.
Hello, this is Richard Willert, and for the next hour I'll be reading from the holiday issue of Newsweek magazine on the Niagara Frontier radio reading service. We're going to do the cover article, which is entitled The Birth of Jesus, Faith and History, How the Story of Christmas Came to Be. And so, the birth of Jesus. From Mary to the manger, how the Gospels mix faith and history to tell a Christmas story and make the case for Christ. The news was unwelcoming, baffling, frightening. Nothing about it was expected or explicable. Roughly 2,000 years ago, according to the Gospel of Luke, in Nazareth of Galilee, a young woman found herself in the presence of Gabriel, the angelic messenger of the Lord, whose name was known to Jews of the day as the mysterious figure who had granted Daniel his prophetic visions. The woman, Luke writes, was a virgin, espoused to a man whose name was Joseph of the house of David, and her name was Mary. Luke's Greek form of the Hebrew Miriam, the sister of Moses and the first great prophetess of Israel. Hail, thou that art highly favored, the Lord is with thee, Gabriel said. Blessed art thou amongst women, terrifying Mary, who was troubled at his saying. Stunned and confused, Mary made no reply, her face apparently betraying anxiety and awe. Sensing her confusion and fear, Gabriel was reassuring. Fear not, Mary, for thou hast found favor with God. Then the angel said, And behold, thou shalt conceive in thy womb and bring forth a son, and shalt call his name Jesus. He shall be great, and shall be called the Son of the Highest, and of his kingdom there shall be no end. In other words, Mary was to bear the Messiah, the fabled and long-promised figure who, in the words of the prophet Jeremiah, would reign as king and deal wisely and shall execute justice and righteousness in the land. Mary was silent, then finally found her voice. How shall this be, seeing I know not a man? Gabriel's reply, that the Holy Ghost shall come upon thee, raised more questions than it answered, not only for Mary, but for Joseph, for the early Christians, and 2 millennia later, for us. In Luke's account, Mary absorbed the tidings of her child's miraculous origin and mission, and pondered them in her heart, still puzzled, still overwhelmed. In the Gospel of Matthew, Joseph, knowing nothing about Gabriel's appearance, is humiliated by the news that his future wife is pregnant and, quote, was minded to put her away privily. In later years, Christians had to contend with charges that their Lord was illegitimate, perhaps the illicit offspring of Mary and a Roman soldier. Now, at the beginning of the 21st century, some scholars treat the Christmas narratives as the first-century inventions designed to strengthen this seemingly tenuous claim that Jesus was the Messiah. And so the story of the birth of Jesus of Nazareth is, fittingly, as riven with complexity and controversy as Christianity itself. This month, more than 1 billion Christians will commemorate their Lord's nativity. Amid candlelight carols and the commingled smells of cedar and incense, the old tale will unfold again. Gabriel's visitation, the journey to Bethlehem, the arrival of the baby in a stable, the glorious announcement of the shepherds to the shepherds in the night, the stars in the east, the mission of the Magi. Yet, as with so many other elements of faith, the nativity narratives are the subject of ongoing scholarly debate over their historical accuracy, their theological meaning, and whether some of the central images and words of the Christian religion owe as much to the pagan culture of the Roman Empire as they do to apostolic revelation. The clash between literalism and a more historical view of faith is also playing out in theaters and bookstores. This year, Mel Gibson's hugely successful movie, The Passion of Christ, provoked a national conversation about Jesus' last days. With 9 million hardcover copies in print, Dan Brown's thriller, The Da Vinci Code, one of the most widely read books of our time, is partly built around the assertion that the early church covered up important facts about Jesus in order to manufacture Christian creeds. A Ron Howard movie starring Tom Hanks is in the works. Like the Victorians, we live in an age of great belief and great doubt, and sometimes it seems as though we must choose between two extremes, the evangelical and the secular. I don't want to be too simplistic, but our faith is somewhat childlike, says the Reverend H.B. London, a vice president of James Dobson's conservative Focus on the Family organization in Colorado Springs. Though other people may question the historical validity of the virgin birth and the death and resurrection of Christ, we don't. Another quote. London's view has vast public support. A Newsweek poll found that 84% of American adults consider themselves Christians, and 82% see Jesus as God or the Son of God. 79% say they believe in the virgin birth, and 67% think the Christmas story, from the angel's appearance to the Star of Bethlehem, is historically accurate. Others, though perhaps fewer in number, are equally passionate about their critical understanding of the faith. The Jesus Seminar, a group of scholars devoted to recovering the Jesus of history, is a battalion in this long-running culture war. One of its members, Robert J. Miller, a professor of religion at Juniata College, wrote, quote, "Born Divine, Jesus and Other Sons of God," end quote, a 2003 book which argues that the nativity narratives can be seen as Christian responses to the birth stories of pagan heroes like Alexander the Great and Caesar Augustus. Literary efforts depicting Jesus as a defined figure in a way Greco-Roman listeners and readers would understand and appreciate. To many minds conditioned by the Enlightenment, shaped by science, and all too aware of the crusades and corruptions of the church, Christmas is a fairy tale. But faith and reason need not be constantly at war. They are, John Paul II once wrote, quote, "like two wings on which the human spirit rises to the contemplation of truth," end quote. And the spirit cannot take flight without both. This is why modern, grounded, discerning people do make leaps of faith, accepting that, as the Gospel of John put it, quote, "the Word became flesh and dwelt among us." Just how he became flesh is the business of Christmas. If we dissect the stories with care, we can see that the Nativity saga is neither fully fanciful nor fully factual, but a layered narrative of early tradition and enduring theology, one whose meaning was captured in the words of the 4th century Nicene Creed that, quote, for us men and for our salvation, end quote, Jesus, quote, came down from heaven, was reincarnated of the Holy Ghost and of the Virgin Mary, and was made man, end quote. For Jesus' contemporaries, the explosive story of his life and its cosmic significance did not begin with his birth, but with his passion and resurrection. Jesus of Nazareth was executed by Pontius Pilate at Passover in about AD 30 for the crime of sedition, after dying a terrible, humiliating death on Golgotha. Jesus, his followers believed, had risen from the dead, turning the world upside down, working backward from the Easter miracle. The early Christians, almost all of whom were Jews and thought of themselves as such, told stories of their Lord's last days, of his ministry, and eventually, it seems, of his birth. The first followers, we should always remember, believed that the risen Lord was going to return and usher in a new apocalyptic age at any moment. Quote, "Truly, I say to you, there are some standing here who shall not taste death before they see the kingdom of God come with power," end quote. Jesus tells his disciples in Mark and in the Epistle to the Romans, a very early writing, Paul says, "The night is far spent, the day is at hand." As the years rolled by and the world endured, however, the apostles and first generations of church fathers realized they were not witnesses about to be swept up into heaven, but earthly stewards of a message that had to be written down, explained, and defended. The construction of Christianity, the early believers gradually discovered, required preserving the stories and sayings of Jesus, shaping that gospel, which means good news in Greek, and spreading it to fellow Jews and to Gentiles. The evangelists believed the salvation of the world was in the balance. They strove to convince other Jews to convert pagans and to control rival Christian factions whose views of Jesus differed from their own. To lose on any of these fronts would set back the cause. So when we read and hear the story now, we are reading and hearing some of the original Christian attempts to ensure the survival and success of a religion that began as little more than one sect within first century Judaism, a milieu of great religious ferment. To make their case in this congested theological universe, the gospel writers collected traditions in circulation and told Jesus' story, not in a clinical way, but, as John put it, so, quote, "that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that believing you may have life in his name," end quote. The origins of the nativity stories are much murkier than the accounts of Jesus' adulthood. Where did the details of miraculous conception, of birth in Bethlehem, of stars in the skies, shepherds in the night, and wise men on a journey come from? Apparently not from Jesus. John P. Meyer, M-E-I-E-R, a Roman Catholic priest and professor at Notre Dame, the author of a monumental series, quote, entitled "A Marginal Jew Rethinking the Historical Jesus," points out that there is no convincing evidence Jesus himself ever spoke of his birth, and neither Mary nor Joseph, who is not a figure in the years of Jesus' public life, appears to have been a direct source. The traditions behind the infancy narrative, Meyer writes, differ essentially from those of the public ministry and the Passion, which were the result of first-hand testimony. The Gospel authors were thus confronted with a literary problem that had to be solved. They wanted to tell the story of Jesus' birth, but apparently had little to work with. And there's a couple of sidebars here. One is called Echoes of Abraham, and it starts out with a quote from Genesis 17, verse 19, which says, "And God said, Sarah, thy wife, shall bear thee a son indeed, and thou shalt call his name Isaac." Then it goes on to say, "From Abraham's wife Sarah, conceiving Isaac, to Hannah bearing Samuel, miraculous births have deep roots in Judaism. Mary's purity, however, is distinctive, for the other biblical examples of God's granting children to the aged or the barren do not involve virgins, but ordinary married women." And then there's another sidebar that's called the pagan tradition. It starts out with a quote from Virgil's fourth Eclogue in 40 BC. "Upon the child now to be born, under whom the race of iron will cease, and a golden race will spring up over the whole world, smile favorably, for your own Apollo is now king." And then it goes on to say, "The myths surrounding Caesar Augustus, who reigned from 27 BC to AD 14, are not dissimilar to the imagery of the Gospels used to describe the birth of Jesus, a sign that the writers were working in the same literary milieu of composing heroic biographies of great men." So back to the text, and I just said that the Gospel authors had wanted to tell the story of Jesus' birth, but had little to work with. Here then is where tradition and theology came in. In 1965, the Second Vatican Council held that while the Scriptures are ultimately, quote, true, end quote, they are not necessarily be taken as accurate in the sense we might take an Associated Press wire report about what happened at a school board meeting as accurate. The Council focused on the importance of paying attention to, quote, literary forms, end quote, in Scripture. The Gospels are such a literary form, and the accounts of Jesus in the canon are not history or biography in the way we use the terms. Classical biography, however, was a different genre. Writers like Plutarch invented details or embellished traditions when they were reconstructing the lives of the famous. And the Christmas saga features miraculous births, supernatural signs, and harbingers of ultimate greatness similar to those found in pagan works. If we examine the nativity narratives as classical biography, then the evangelist's means and mission to convey theological truths about salvation, not to record just the facts history, become much clearer. The earliest and sparsest gospel, Mark's, which was about AD 60, begins at Jesus' baptism by John as an adult, skipping the nativity altogether. The latest and most philosophical gospel, John, circa 90 AD, links Jesus with God at the very birth of the universe. Quote, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." End quote. With a grandeur and a force that renders the details of Jesus' early arrival irrelevant. Though Paul writes that Jesus was, quote, born of a woman, born under the law, end quote, The rest of the New Testament is silent about the Nativity, so we are left with Matthew and Luke, Gospels composed between AD 60 and 90. The central events in both Nativity accounts are Mary's virginal conception, which renders her child a truly unique figure, and Jesus' birth in Bethlehem, which makes him the long-expected Davidic Messiah. Miraculous conceptions have deep roots in Jewish tradition. The aged Sarah bearing Isaac, the barren wife of Manoah bearing Samson, the barren Hannah bearing Samuel, and according to Luke, Mary's kinswoman Elizabeth, both aged and barren, bearing John the Baptist just before Mary conceived Jesus. What is distinctive about Mary is the Gospel's emphasis on her sexual virtue. The other biblical examples of God's granting children to the aged or the barren do not involve virgins, but ordinary married women living with their husbands. This is no small difference. By asserting Mary's virginity, Matthew and Luke are taking the device of the miraculous conception further than any other Jewish writer had before. Why? The simplest explanation is that it happened. As uncongenial as that opinion may be to modern audiences, Shakespeare was right when he had Hamlet say, "There are more things in heaven and earth than are dreamt of in your philosophy." The miraculous may strike some as fantastical, but countless people have believed and believe now that God intervened in the temporal world in just this way. If the virginal conception were a historical fact, however, it is somewhat odd that there is no memory of it recorded in the gospel accounts of Jesus' ministry, or in the Acts of the Apostles, or in the rest of the New Testament. It is also striking that in parts of the Gospels, Mary herself appears unaware of her son's provenance and destiny. Then there's a parenthesis here. In Mark, when Jesus is casting out devils at the beginning of his ministry, his friends, the sense of the Greek is family or household. In other words, his friends means family or household, which would presumably include his mother, thought he was mentally disturbed and tried to stop him, saying he is beside himself. If Mary had received Gabriel's message, then she should have known her son was not mad, but the Messiah. And even if she were not around in this story in Mark, had Jesus been born in such extraordinary circumstances, it is logical to assume that those closest to him would have known at least something of it. Enough anyway to see Jesus as someone with a special role or destiny of which the exorcisms were a likely part. End parentheses. Just a reminder that you're listening or reading of an article from the holiday issue of Newsweek on the Niagara Frontier Reading Service. If we assume, for the sake of argument, that the virginal conception is not a fact, but an article of faith, there are other explanations for Matthew's and Luke's nativity accounts. Theology, parentheses, that Jesus was not merely another prophet king figure like Moses or David, but something more, end parentheses, and narrative symmetry both argued for a unique birth. Quote, the early church insisted on the virginal conception as the logical beginning to a story that climaxed with the physical resurrection, end quote, says Deirdre Good, a professor of New Testament at the General Theological Seminary in New York. Quote, the two separate miracles form a theologically perfect whole. It simply would not have been enough for Jesus to have been chosen by God in his lifetime. Through divine intervention, Jesus was seen to be both divine and human from the start, end quote. The virginity detail did not particularly help the cause early on. To non-Christian Jews and pagans, the first Christians were superstitious and backward, a group of marginal people on the fringes of empire preaching an outlandish message. According to the Yale historian Yaroslav Pelikan, Celsus, a fierce Platonic critic of Christianity who wrote between AD 175 and 180, attacked the idea that God had come into the world in, quote, some corner of Judea somewhere, end quote. And one Roman emperor, Pelikan writes, dismissed the Jewish and Christian God as, quote, essentially the deity of a primitive and uncivilized folk. Defensive about such charges, educated Christians fought back. The apologist Origen of Alexandria answered Celsus, arguing that, quote, we tell no incredible tales when we explain the doctrines about Jesus, end quote. The last thing the Christians wanted was to appear to be yet another mythological cult, worshiping some kind of demigod. Their deep Jewish faith in the commandment to have, quote, no other God before me foreclosed that possibility. Incredible tales were for the idolatrous. And there were scandalous tales in circulation too. Was the story of the virginal conception told to hide Jesus' illegitimacy? As startling as the allegation is for many, it dates from at least the 2nd century, and maybe as early as Jesus' lifetime. It was Jesus himself who fabricated the story that he was born of a virgin, Celsus wrote in AD 180. In fact, however, his mother was a poor country woman who earned her living by spinning. She had been driven out by her carpenter husband when she was convicted of adultery with a soldier named Panthera. She then wandered about and secretly gave birth to Jesus. Later, because he was poor, he hired himself out in Egypt, where he became adept in magical powers. Puffed up by these, he claimed for himself the title of God. End quote there. That was all from Celsus. 2nd and 3rd century Christian writers allege that some Jews also suggested Jesus' birth was illicit. Perhaps the most intriguing possible hint of illegitimacy in the New Testament comes in the Gospel of John, in an exchange between Jesus and the temple priests. The back and forth is sharp, even brutal, with Jesus accusing the priests of failing to live up to the example of their common father, Abraham. Their reply, we be not born of fornication. We have but one Father, God himself. End quote. In his exploration of this passage, the late Raymond E. Brown, a distinguished scholar and Roman Catholic priest who taught at Union Theological Seminary, wrote, quote, the Jews may be saying, we were not born illegitimate, but you were. The emphatic use of the pronoun, Greek pronoun, we, allows that interpretation. If Jesus had been conceived by a human father before Joseph and Mary had begun their lives together as husband and wife, either by Joseph himself, a soldier, or someone else, then the Holy Ghost would have provided a convenient cover story for the early church. Such speculation can only be that, speculation, and even contemplating it is interestingly chiefly for the window it opens on the ferocity of early debates over Jesus. To the first believers, the virginal conception was not a fiction to hide an embarrassing truth, but a way of understanding their Lord's uniqueness. He was not a prophet or a God, but the Son of God who, in the words of the Episcopal Book of Common Prayer, came to, quote, share our human nature, to live and die as one of us, to reconcile us to you, the God and Father of all, end quote. Jesus was such a revolutionary force that both Matthew and Luke sought to make him comprehensible in the context of established Jewish imagery and prophecy. In Luke, Mary's indelible 138-word reaction to the incarnation, quote, my soul doth magnify the Lord, and my spirit hath rejoiced in God my Savior, end quote, is a powerful echo of Hannah's 264-word prayer of thanksgiving in 1 Samuel when she learns she is pregnant. Quote, my heart rejoiceth in the Lord, I rejoice in thy salvation, end quote. Jews, hearing Mary's story, were thus able to associate Jesus with past figures of deliverance. Matthew makes an even more explicit connection with the Jewish past, stating outright that Jesus is answering ancient expectations, citing Isaiah 7:14, quote, behold, a virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel, which being interpreted is God with us, end quote. The evangelist writes, now all this was done that it might be fulfilled which was spoken of the Lord by the prophet. A problem with this elegant passage from Isaiah is that it may have long been mistranslated and misinterpreted. In his magisterial work, The Birth of the Messiah, Raymond Brown calls the conflict over this single consequential verse of, quote, the most famous debates, end quote, in the history of biblical interpretation. He notes that the original Hebrew used by the prophet is more properly translated as, quote, the young girl, not the virgin. And the overall context of the Hebraic Isaiah passage does not refer to a virginal conception in the distant future. The sign offered by the prophet was the imminent birth of a child, probably Davidic, but naturally conceived, who would illustrate God's providential care for his people. The Greek sense of the term, and Matthew is likely working from the Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible, suggests that the virgin will conceive. Brown writes, by natural means, once she is united with her husband, it is one biblical war without apparent end. In the early 1950s, when the translators of the Revised Standard Version rendered the King James virgin as young woman, a defensible textual decision, some literalist believers burned the new Bibles. Geography, as Napoleon is said to have remarked, is destiny. Hence, the Gospel's emphasis on Jesus' birthplace. The expectation was that the Messiah, understood in the early 1st century as a David-like king who would end Roman occupation and rule over a new golden age for Israel and for the whole world, would come from Bethlehem, the village in which David had been born. In the Gospels, some objected to the messianic claims made for Jesus by pointing out that he was a Nazarene. Matthew attacks that skepticism head on, writing simply that Jesus was born, quote, in Bethlehem of Judea, end quote, and that wise men from the east, guided by a star, went there in search of the baby who inspired this celestial sign. Could there have been such a star? Halley's Comet is estimated to have made an appearance in 12 BC, and Matthew may have appropriated the detail long afterward. He could also have been thinking of a line from the book of Numbers, quote, "There shall come a star out of Jacob, and a scepter shall rise out of Israel," end quote. What is clearer is that the visit of the Magi came to be seen as fulfillment of Psalm 72, quote, "The kings of Tarshish and of the isles shall bring presents, the kings of Sheba and Seba shall offer gifts," end quote, reads the scripture. "Yea, all kings shall fall down before him, all nations shall serve him." There is no historical evidence of such a visit, but the symbolic significance is obvious. Even as a baby, Jesus is inverting the very order of things, with earthly potentates bowing before a child. Matthew's detail about the specific gifts comes from Isaiah, quote, "And they from Sheba shall come, they shall bring gold and incense, and they shall show forth the praises of the Lord," end quote. Another reminder that you're listening to a reading of an article from the holiday issue of Newsweek on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. To resolve the problem of Jesus' connection with both Bethlehem and Nazareth, Matthew portrays Mary and Joseph as residents of Bethlehem who were later forced to move north to Nazareth. With a keen dramatic sense, he also adds two stories evoking the memory of God's deliverance of his people from slavery in Egypt. The king of Judea, Herod, learns of the birth of this alleged Messiah from the wise men, whom he asks to find the child and return to him with the particulars. In a dream, God tells the Magi not to make their report, and then appears to Joseph and says, "Arise and take the young child and his mother and flee into Egypt, for Herod will seek the young child and destroy him." Enraged and jealous, Herod orders a massacre of all the male children in Bethlehem, thus connecting Jesus' birth with the first Passover, when God spared Israel's sons from the same bloody decree by Pharaoh. History records no such Herodian slaughter, though Herod was undeniably a cruel ruler. Luke does not mention a journey to Egypt, nor is there any other New Testament allusion to such an important event in the life of young Jesus. Once Matthew has started this story, though, he makes the most of it, writing that Joseph's mission was undertaken that it might be fulfilled, which was spoken of the Lord by the prophet, saying, "Out of Egypt I have called my son." The prophet was Hosea. The Nazareth question is then resolved rather neatly, for Matthew, as Joseph and Mary, moved to Galilee on their return from Egypt. Luke's conundrum is just the opposite of Matthew's: how to get Mary and Joseph, who in his gospel were living in Nazareth in the north, down to Bethlehem in the south. Summoning the weapons of history, apparently pinpointing time, place, and circumstance with epic eloquence, Luke writes, "And it came to pass in those days that there went out a decree from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be taxed." And this taxing was first made when Cyrenius was governor of Syria. "And all went to be taxed, every one to his own city. And Joseph went up also from Galilee out of the city of Nazareth into Judea unto the city of David, which is called Bethlehem, because he was of the house and lineage of David, to be taxed with Mary, his espoused wife, being great with child. Yet almost nothing in Luke's story stands up to close historical scrutiny. Brown finds it dubious on almost every score. Augustus conducted no global census, and no more local one makes sense in Luke's time frame, setting Jesus' birth at a moment when the princes of this world are exerting temporal power over the people is a deft device, though, for the theological point of Jesus' arrival is that anyone who chooses to believe in him will ultimately be subject only to God. Evoking the prophet Joel in the book of Acts, Peter says that it shall come to pass that whosoever shall call on the name of the Lord shall be saved. And there is nothing any mortal emperor or governor can do to foreclose the promise of the kingdom Jesus said he was offering. The power of the nativity message, that a helpless child is in fact a heavenly king, lies in its consistent pattern of reversal, of making the weak strong, the humble mighty. The stable, the manger, and the swaddling of Jesus are such theological touches. Since Matthew seems to assume that Mary and Joseph lived at Bethlehem, he is silent on these familiar details. It is Luke, the writer who put them on the road to answer the census, who adds the inn, the manger, and the swaddling. The creche scene strikes three Old Testament notes. The inn could be traced to Jeremiah, who asks of the Savior, "Why are you like an alien in the land, like a traveler who stays in lodgings?" The manger's roots may lie in the very beginning of Isaiah, where he writes, "The ox knoweth his owner, and the ass his master's crib, but Israel doth not know, my people doth not consider." And Mary's tender care of the baby is similar to a remark of Solomon's in the Book of Wisdom. "I was carefully swaddled and nursed, for no king has any other way to begin at birth." There is, of course, no way to know whether Luke's story of the heavenly host announcing Jesus' arrival to the shepherds really happened. One has to believe in angels and explain away the fact that the Gospels fail to note any ensuing communal or individual recollection of this spectacular birth, one witnessed by the rustics in Luke and the Magi in Matthew in the years of Jesus' public life. Yet the language never fails to captivate. "For unto us a child is born," wrote Isaiah. "Unto us a son is given, and the government shall be on his shoulder, and his name shall be called Wonderful, Counselor, the Mighty God, the Everlasting Father, the Prince of Peace." So it was that when Luke came to herald the birth of his hero to the shepherds, he struck the same notes. "For unto you is born this day in the city of David a Savior, who is Christ the Lord." Such monotheistic theology, a Christian obedience to the Jewish commandment to have no other God before me, was, however, automatically appealing to only a slice of the evangelist's ultimate audience. Christianity was to be preached, as Paul put it in his epistle to the Romans, to the Jews first, also to the Greek. The basic features of the Nativity story were familiar to pagan ears. In Suetonius' 2nd century biography of Augustus, who ruled as emperor from 27 BC to AD 14, omens in the natural world had heralded Augustus' birth, which was itself the result of divine intervention. Aria, Augustus' mother, was said to have fallen asleep when Apollo, taking the form of a serpent, impregnated her. That there was physical contact is suggested by Suetonius' assertion that afterward Atia purified herself as usual after the embraces of her husband. The baby, Suetonius writes, was thought to be the son of Apollo. On the day of his birth, the senator in Rome declared that the world had got a master, and Adia's husband Octavius dreamt that he saw his son under more than human appearance, with thunder and scepter, and the other insignia of Jupiter, having on his head a radiant crown mounted upon a chariot decked with laurel. The parallels to the Jesus story are clear. A deity chooses to send a son from the divine to the temporal world through a woman. The glorious news of the coming of the king is made known to others, and the woman's loyal husband, rather than recoiling, is included in the revelation. But Augustus was not the product of a Christ-like conception as portrayed in the Gospels. The evangelists hewed to the conviction that Mary had no sexual contact of any kind, and scholars of antiquity have yet to find another example that precisely mirrors the Annunciation. Still, as the Christian gospel spread through the early centuries of the first millennium, audiences familiar with Virgil would have been receptive to the rhythms and ideas of Matthew's and Luke's stories. In his fourth eclogue, written in 40 BC, the poet evokes an age of peace presided over by a baby in a cradle of flowers. Upon the child now to be born, under whom the race of iron will cease, and a golden race will spring up over the whole world, do you, O chaste Lucina, the goddess of childbirth, smile favorably, for your own Apollo is now king. The baby's coming, then, is hailed with these words: Behold, the world trembles in homage, the expanses of earth and sea and the reaches of sky. Virgil and the evangelists were working in essentially the same literary tradition, and the fourth eclogue is a sign of how pervasive such birth imagery was before, during, and after Jesus' lifetime. The collision of different factions and different traditions in the world of Christianity's first years was mirrored by civil wars between Jesus' followers. Then as now, Christians tended to disagree sharply with one another, but the essential creed is so familiar to modern ears that it is difficult to recall how many different views of Jesus were circulating among Christian groups during the first 2 centuries or so. A complex movement properly known as Gnosticism, from the Greek gnosis, meaning knowledge, offered an apparently compelling and appealing version of Christianity in which believers sought, in addition to received teaching, inner knowledge of God. Insight, or gnosis, was the experience of searching for the divine, the source of our creation within oneself, says Elaine Pagels, professor of religion at Princeton and the best-selling author of the Gnostic Gospels, and most recently, Beyond Belief, the Secret Gospel of Thomas. Such Christians claim to go beyond the views of Jesus expressed in the New Testament to seek, in addition, personal perception and transformation. In the eyes of competing and ultimately victorious Christians, this religious path put too much emphasis on the personal and not enough on Jesus as the incarnate Son of God who was crucified for the sins of the world. It was, in other words, heresy. Interestingly, in Greek, heresy means choice. And the virginal conception was one of the battlefields on which the internecine conflict took place. In the Gnostic Gospel of Philip, Pagels points out the Gospel author reinterprets Jesus' birth, suggesting that while Jesus was born biologically to Mary and Joseph, He was reborn spiritually as the Son of God, his heavenly Father, through the Holy Ghost, who was functioning as a sort of heavenly mother. To Philip, Jesus was a paradigmatic figure whose rebirth was available to others in the rite of baptism. Such a view prompted a fierce counterattack from Irenaeus, that's Irenaeus, a late 2nd century church father who believed that Jesus was utterly unique, that he had been born in a unique way and had been raised from the dead in a unique way. Writing about the virginal conception, Irenaeus said, "In the last times, not by the will of flesh, nor by the will of man, but by the good pleasure of the Father, his hands formed a living man in order that Adam might be created again after the image and likeness of God." By Nicaea, this interpretation of the tradition of the Nativity had largely carried the day. For believers, Jesus was in fact, in the reinterpretation of Isaiah by Matthew, Emmanuel, or God within us. Jesus was God within us. A man with no human father, a king who died a criminal's death, a God who assures us of everlasting life in a world to come while the world he made is consumed by war and strife. Christianity is a religion of perplexing contradictions. To live an examined faith, believers have to acknowledge those complexities and engage them, however frustrating it may be. We are in a world of mystery, one with bright light before us, sufficient for our proceeding forward through all difficulties, wrote John Henry Newman, the great Victorian cleric whose intellectual journey led him from the Anglican priesthood to the Roman Curia. Take away this light and we are utterly wretched. We know not where we are, how we are sustained, what will become of us, and of all that is dear to us, what we are to believe and why we are in being. The Christmas star is just one such light. There are others. Whatever our backgrounds, whatever our creeds, many of us are in search of the kind of faith that will lead us through the darkness toward home. In Luke, the angelic host hails the Lord and then says, "On earth peace, goodwill toward men." A promise whose fulfillment is worth our prayers, not only in this season, but always. You have been listening to a reading of an article from the holiday issue of Newsweek magazine. Your reader has been Richard Willert. Thank you for listening.
Coming up next on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service, we have episode number 9 of You Belong Here by Megan Miranda. Following that at 3 o'clock is the New York Magazine, and at 4 o'clock is Christmas Time in History from our friends at IAAIS. Stay with us for these readings and more. You're listening to the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Radio Reading serves people who are blind or have a print disability throughout Western New York and Southern Ontario's Niagara Peninsula. From its broadcast studios at 1199 Harlem Road in Cheektowaga, just north of Clinton Street. Almost 40 years and more than 300,000 hours of radio readings to those unable to read printed matter on their own. Our broadcast signal is provided at no charge by WNED. Volunteer radio readers broadcast daily readings of newspapers, magazines, and books. For more information on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service, Call us at 716 821 5555. Are you facing challenges with vision loss and need help with your smartphone, sending emails, navigating the internet, and staying connected with your family? VIA, Visually Impaired Advancement, is offering free classes for seniors weekly at multiple locations with free assistance for your smartphone, email, and internet skills. There's a new session every week, and it rotates between the South Towns and the North Towns. It's at your local Erie County libraries and at 10 a.m. and 11:30 a.m. For more information, call Elhana Porter at 716-888-4632. Again, that's 716-888-4632. You're listening to your Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Our volunteer radio readers broadcast daily readings 24 hours a day of newspapers, magazines, books, and other printed matter. People who are blind or have a print disability throughout Western New York and Southern Ontario's Niagara Peninsula are provided special reading radios. This year, the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service marks almost 40 years on the air. A broadcast signal is provided at no charge by WNED. Radio Reading Service studios are at 1199 Harlem Road in Cheektowaga. The Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service website is nfradioreading.org. For more information, call us at 716-821-5555.
The Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service now presents